The Metro Court had the hum of a stage before the curtain rises, flatware chiming, waiters threading through candlelight, the high skyline pressing against the glass like an audience waiting for chaos. Sonny Corinthos moved through it all with the economy of a man who has learned to hear danger long before it speaks. Tonight it spoke with a stare. Marco Rios, rigid at the periphery, his jaw locked, his eyes radiating the kind of fury that isn't satisfied by apologies or time. The name he would not say out loud was the name that welded him to vengeance, Natalia Ramirez. Grief had taught Marco patience, rage had taught him purpose. When Jen Sidwell arrived, unhurried and unbothered, he brought the promise that purpose would soon have a plan. Sidwell sat with the casual entitlement of a man who prefers other people to do the bleeding for him. He listened to Marco count the costs of a future that wasn't his, a ledger where every line ended with Sonny paying interest. Sidwell didn't argue, he didn't need to. He simply folded the room around them, gestures small enough to be missed by anyone who didn't know how to look, and assured Marco that the hour for settling accounts was close. Their conversation drew one more orbiting body, Martin, adept at disguising curiosity as civility. Martin had seen too many crusades in Port Charles to mistake Sidwell's cool for caution. What he heard instead was irritation sharpening into strategy. Sidwell had the tone of a man measuring a wall and deciding which brick to pull first. This wasn't about one fire or one affront. It was about momentum. It was about scoring on Sonny until the scoreboard itself became a weapon. Across the room, family intruded on business the way it always does, with inconvenient truth. Christina Corinthos Davis intercepted her father with a report packaged as concern. Alexis Davis had committed to defending Willow Tate. In a town that keeps its secrets in plain sight, that choice had implications that reached straight into the Corinthos bloodline. If Alexis advocated for Willow, the courtroom would inevitably turn its gaze to Michael, and Christina knew a public fight inside a legal proceeding can maim a family in ways bullets never do. Her warning was targeted and tender: be careful. Sonny heard what she didn't say, that every new defense becomes a new battlefield, and the prosecution of the past never rests. Sidwell didn't keep his distance for long. He approached Sonny with a smile that never met his eyes and a proposition labeled, clarity. They talked like men who've played too many games together to pretend they aren't still keeping score. Charlie's pub hung between them like smoke that refuses to clear, one blaze, one accusation, 100 interpretations. Sidwell denied the match. Sonny didn't need a confession to identify a pattern. A man like Sidwell builds his alibis the same hour he drafts his attacks. The refusal was almost elegant, and that was what bothered Sonny most. Elegant men rarely get their hands dirty, but the floor still ends up red. Their words were careful, but the silence after each sentence did the shouting. Christina re-entered with a plea that felt both naive and brave. Marco wasn't a soldier of chaos, she said, he wanted peace. She had seen him when he thought no one was looking, head bowed, shoulders collapsed under the weight of a loss that couldn't be litigated away, and she believed that grief could be redirected into grace. Sonny wanted to believe her. He wanted to collect this small hope and carry it home. But experience is a jealous tutor. Every instinct told him that Marco was more entangled than his remorse would admit. Peace, in the hands of a grieving man, often means silence from the person he blames. And silence can be enforced. When Sonny finally stepped back from the table, he didn't exhale. He filed details instead, the tremor he didn't see in Sidwell's hand, the unblinking certainty in Marco's stare, the way Martin's questions never ventured beyond what would be admissible later. He is a man who has survived not by winning every battle, but by refusing to misunderstand the ones he was losing. Something in the room smelled like tomorrow's trouble. Clean, antiseptic, organized. Tomorrow's trouble had a name and a lineage. Away from the dining room's glow, Sidwell and Marco reconvened to strip their rage of all ceremony. They spoke about a project nobody sane should resurrect, a blueprint scribbled in the margins of Port Charles's darkest chapters. The Cesar Faison Project. The words tasted like old smoke and fresh gasoline. Faison was a ghost whose crimes still cast shadows across the city's daylight. Invoking him said less about nostalgia than it did about method. Sidwell wasn't improvising. He was reverse engineering fear. Where other men would lunge, he would replicate. Where other men would threaten, he would design. Marco, for all his rage, understood that design demands patience. If he couldn't have that, he could at least have the illusion of it, and Sidwell was happy to furnish illusions. But design falters when the parts refuse to move. Sidwell's irritation found a target: Dalton. Progress required discipline, and Dalton had delivered neither. Delays breed leaks. Leaks breed enemies. Enemies breed heat. Sidwell didn't do heat. He preferred refrigeration, problems frozen until he could chisel them into the shapes he liked. If Dalton couldn't keep pace, someone would have to replace him. That someone, in Sidwell's calculus, was Britt. It was an audacious pivot, sure, but audacity has always been the currency of men who wager other people's lives. All that remained was convincing his partner, a person unseen but palpably present in the way Sidwell stressed risk like a dare and described outcomes like a guarantee. It is easy to sell danger to someone who believes catastrophe proves their genius. Back upstairs, Christina replayed every frame of the evening like a film she refused to let end in tragedy. She has her mother's insistence and her father's reflexes. Those gifts don't always get along. Defending Marco in front of Sonny wasn't rebellion, it was an attempt to widen the narrow corridor between war and surrender. She believed in the rehabilitation of motives because she has had to live with her own. But belief is not immunity. If Sidwell had anchored himself to Marco's grief, then even good men pull the rope that drags them over a cliff. Christina sensed it and hated that sensing it made her sound like her father. She doesn't want to inhabit his paranoia, she also doesn't want to bury another person who thought they could outrun it. Martin left the hotel with a question he couldn't shake: was he a spectator or an accessory? Legal minds in Port Charles get paid to translate danger into language, to file it in briefs, to argue it until a judge declares the chaos orderly. But But Martin had just sat at a table where order was a costume. The truth was naked and ugly. Sidwell wanted not merely to hurt Sonny but to degrade the very structure that shields him. Scores turn into scorched earth when the scorer decides the playing field is the enemy. Martin knew this and found no comfort in the wisdom. Knowing what's coming doesn't shorten the distance. Sonny, for his part, returned to the quiet space that never stays quiet long. He catalogued the faces that depend on his steadiness: Michael, imperiled by perception; Willow, now bound to a defense that could redirect blame; Alexis, principled to a fault in a town that punishes principles; Christina, straddling the line between compassion and denial. The calculus grew cruel quickly. If he moved too fast, he'd confirm all the stories told about him. If he moved too slowly, those stories might be the last words spoken over someone he loved. He has always lived inside this paradox: protector and threat, savior and suspect. The only constant has been the requirement to choose, and then to own the choice. Meanwhile, Sidwell massaged the timeline with a surgeon's detachment. The final stages of the Faison design demanded both patience and spectacle. That was the point: to make Sonny react in public while the real injury occurred in private. A fire at a pub had framed the conversation. The next spark would be colder, cleaner, less obvious. A nudge here, a leak there, a nudge again, until allies begin to question their instructions and enemies begin to think they're allies. Port Charles has seen explosions. What it fears most now is choreography. Sidwell promised Marco that choreography would end with an encore no one would forget. He meant it. People who live on leverage rarely speak in metaphors. In the shadow of this architecture, smaller decisions took on terrifying scale. Dalton's reluctance wasn't simply annoying, it was dangerous. Delay exposed angles. Angles invited light, light rotted plans. Britt's name returned to the table because she occupies a liminal space, close enough to be useful, distant enough to be deniable, brilliant enough to improve the odds, stubborn enough to break a design if she suspects its true cost. Sidwell would call that a feature, not a bug. He mistakes conscience for calibration. He believes he can tune it. If he's wrong, the music will turn on him. If he's right, the music will drown out the people who tried to warn her. So the evening at the Metro Court ended the way the best storms do, without rain, but with air that tells you the clouds have an agenda. Couples paid their checks. Staff cleared the tables. The skyline pretended to be indifferent. But the city had heard the argument, and it would remember the names. Sonny walked out knowing peace had been rebranded as leverage. Christina left convinced that redemption is only real if you choose it before someone sells it to you. Martin disappeared into the night with the uneasy realization that some legal strategies arrive prepackaged as sins. And Jens Sidwell, the man who treats risk like a tonic, slipped into the dark with a plan he called final. Port Charles doesn't measure time in hours, it measures time in aftershocks. By morning, someone will wake with a new enemy they didn't know they'd made. Someone will field a phone call that sounds like kindness and is actually a command. Someone will open a door and find a box they didn't order, containing an object that isn't illegal but will look like it is when photographed from the wrong angle. That is what final stages mean in this city. Not the end of a plot, but the beginning of consequences that won't care who wrote them. Sonny will prepare the way he always has, by shrinking the circle, testing the fences, listening for the creaks that reveal a hinge about to fail. He will not trust the denial, he will not concede the accusation, he will, inevitably, choose the moment to push back. When he does, the push will be read as proof. That is the trap Sidwell prefers. Force a man to be the person you've already convinced the world he is, and the applause arrives on schedule. But traps have builders, and builders leave fingerprints. The work ahead is not only to survive the scheme, but to expose its designer without burning down the life you're trying to protect. And then there is Marco, the man who wanted peace and asked revenge to deliver it. Grief makes simple promises. This will help, this will end, this will fill. It never keeps them. The night has drawn him into a design that will use his love for Natalia as its prettiest cover. If he steps off now, he risks betraying the only vow he believes he has left. If he stays, he risks becoming the instrument of a legacy built by a ghost whose name still stops conversations. Some choices do not come with mercy. He will have to invent his own. By the time the Metro Court resets its tables for the next dinner service, the city will already be in motion. Sidwell will have nudged a partner he should fear more than he trusts. Britt will be closer to a choice than anyone wants her to be. Dalton will discover that inaction is a verdict. Alexis will arrange case files that argue for the idea that truth can still matter, and Michael will wonder how to be a good man when every path to goodness is mined. Somewhere in that maze, Willow will become a symbol for people who need symbols more than they need facts. Symbols win headlines. Facts decide trials. Port Charles knows which one arrives first. None of this changes the essential geometry. The room where Sidwell and Marco conspired was just a room, the project they named was just a blueprint. What gives blueprints power are the hands willing to build from them and the eyes willing to look away while they do. That is the bet Sidwell has placed. That fear will do the labor, and fatigue will do the rest. He may be right, for a while. He may even be applauded, for a moment. But applause is a tide, it goes out, and when it does, the shore is littered with the things people thought would float. The curtain falls on the evening, but not on the play. Sonny is not a man who mistakes intermission for ending. He recognizes the shape of an attack even when it's cloaked in courtesy. He has counted the exits. He has learned which windows are meant to be opened and which are meant to be fallen through. If Sidwell truly is entering the final stages, then the city is entering something else entirely. The hours where a single misstep stops being a setback and starts being a signature. Watch the hands. Watch the heat. Watch the people who keep insisting that the fire you smell is a rumor. In Port Charles, denial is always the last good night before the alarms.